Before we begin, a quick warning. This story contains details that may be distressing to some viewers. Please listen with discretion. If you enjoy true crime and mysterious cases, please take a moment to subscribe to ChapmanCrime. Your support helps me share more stories, reach new viewers, and keep this channel growing. Don't forget to like, comment, and follow. It truly helps more than you know. On October 23, 1981, in Newburgh Heights, Ohio, 17-year-old Kurt Sova told his mother he'd be home by dinner. He never came back. Kurt was a quiet, good-natured teen, not the type to stay out late or cause trouble. That night, he and a friend went to a small house party nearby. It was crowded, mostly strangers, and there was plenty of alcohol. Witnesses said he seemed fine at first, then suddenly complained of feeling sick. He said he was walking home. No one saw him leave. When he didn't return, his mother Dorothy began calling friends and knocking on doors. At the duplex where the party was held, she was told no one named Kurt had been there, a lie later proven false. Police initially dismissed the case as a runaway, but Dorothy refused to accept that. For 5 days, she and her husband searched the streets. Then, on October 28th, Kurt's body was found in a ravine just 500 yards from where he'd last been seen. He was wearing the same clothes from that night, clean, dry, and neatly arranged. There were no signs of struggle and no clear cause of death. The coroner ruled it probable natural causes, possibly hypothermia. But the spot where he was found had already been searched several times. His body hadn't been there before. A store owner reported seeing a boy matching Kurt's description days after his disappearance, looking dazed and lost. Another witness claimed to have seen 2 men carrying someone toward that ravine the night before the body was discovered. Neither lead went anywhere. A few days after Kurt's funeral, a family friend received a call. A quiet male voice said, "If you think what happened to Kurt Sova is strange, wait till you hear what happens next." Then hung up. Nothing ever did. Dorothy believed her son had been drugged or harmed at the party, and that others covered it up. Police re-examined the case years later, but no one was ever charged. More than 40 years have passed, and the mystery still lingers in Newburgh Heights. A boy who walked into the night, a mother who never stopped searching, and a silence that refuses to fade. On the evening of May 16, 1937, Paris was alive with its usual weekend hum. Cafes glowing, streetcars rattling, and the smell of rain on cobblestone. But as the clock neared 7 p.m., something happened that would baffle France for generations. A young woman boarded a metro carriage alone, and less than a minute later she was dead. Her name was Laetitia Toureau, 29 years old, elegant, and well-known in her neighborhood. She was stylish, confident, and lived an independent life at a time when few women could. To friends, she was a quiet factory worker. To others, she was something more, a woman with secrets. That Sunday evening, witnesses saw her step into an empty first-class compartment at the Porte de Charenton station. The train departed, and within 60 seconds it reached the next stop, Porte Dorée. When the doors opened, passengers waiting to board gasped. Laetitia was slumped forward, a knife buried deep in her neck. She was still wearing her gloves, her purse neatly in her lap. No one had seen anyone enter or leave, and no one had heard a sound. The attack seemed impossible. The carriage had been locked between stations, its doors sealed until arrival. Investigators concluded the killer must have boarded at the same stop, struck within seconds, and slipped away through the automatic doors, vanishing into the evening crowd. But who could plan a murder that precise? As detectives dug into Laetitia's life, her quiet image began to fracture. They learned she had worked at a dance hall known for its connections to spies, informants, and members of Paris's criminal underworld. She was charming and discreet, the kind of woman who could listen without being noticed. Police soon discovered she had been working as a part-time informant for a private intelligence network that tracked political extremists during the tense years before World War II. The deeper they looked, the stranger it became. Her acquaintances included both far-right nationalists and anti-fascist groups. Some said she was passing information between them. Others whispered she had fallen in love with a married man involved in politics, a man powerful enough to stay unnamed. Theories spread across Paris like wildfire. Espionage, betrayal, a jealous lover, or an assassination disguised as mystery. Despite months of investigation, no suspect was ever arrested. The murder weapon was never traced and no witness ever came forward. By 1939, the case went cold, overshadowed by the approach of war. Files were lost, witnesses scattered, and the Metro incident faded into the archives of unsolved crimes. Today, the story of Letitia Thoreau still fascinates historians and crime enthusiasts alike. How could someone commit a perfect murder inside a locked carriage in the center of a city, in broad daylight, and then vanish forever? Some say it was political, others believe it was personal. But whatever the motive, one fact remains unshakable. In a single minute between two stations, Letitia Thoreau's life and her secrets were silenced forever. On the morning of June 13, 2001, 19-year-old Jason Jolkowski left his Omaha home to walk less than half a mile to meet a coworker who was giving him a ride to work. It was a warm summer day when quiet, uneventful, ordinary. Jason never made it to that meeting. And from that morning on, he was gone. Jason was responsible, kind, and soft-spoken, the type who rarely caused his parents a moment's worry. He worked part-time at a local radio station and took community college classes. That morning, his car wouldn't start, so he called a coworker for a ride.
They agreed to meet halfway between his house and the high school nearby.
He told his parents he'd be back that evening. He never returned. When Jason didn't show up for work, his boss called the house assuming he'd overslept. By the next morning, panic set in. His parents contacted police, but there was little to go on. He had walked a familiar route through a quiet residential area. Broad sidewalks, morning traffic, neighbors mowing lawns. No one saw him leave his driveway, and no one saw him arrive at the high school. It was as if he vanished somewhere in between. There were no signs of struggle, no dropped belongings, and no evidence that he'd planned to run away. His wallet, keys, and clothes were all still at home. He had about $60 in his pocket and no reason to disappear. Police searched the route on foot and by helicopter, combing ditches and wooded lots. Dogs picked up his scent but lost it within a block of his house. Over time, the case drew comparisons to other vanishings, sudden, silent, and without witnesses. Some theorized he was abducted. Others suggested he may have accepted a ride from someone he knew. But Jason wasn't the trusting type. He was careful, thoughtful, and rarely took risks. Every lead led nowhere. Every tip ended in silence. As weeks passed, his parents turned to the community for help, printing flyers and holding vigils. But Jason's case soon became one of Omaha's greatest mysteries. No activity on his bank account, no calls, no sightings, and nothing. To this day, investigators have not found a single trace. His family later helped pass Jason's Law, legislation improving the way missing person cases are handled in Nebraska, ensuring that searches begin immediately, regardless of age or circumstance. It was their way of turning heartbreak into something that might save others. More than 20 years later, the sidewalk Jason walked that morning still looks the same, tree-lined, peaceful, and deceptively ordinary. Somewhere along that short stretch of road, a young man simply disappeared, and to this day, no one can say how or why. On a quiet Montana night in April 1989, 37-year-old Patricia Meehan climbed into her car and started driving east along Highway 200. It was late, and the road stretched endlessly through the plains, flat, silent, and empty. A few hours later, she was gone. What happened in between remains one of the strangest mysteries in modern American history. Patricia was a trained animal caretaker who had grown up on a ranch in Pennsylvania. Friends described her as gentle and introspective, a woman who loved quiet places and long drives. But in the weeks before her disappearance, her parents noticed something was wrong. She'd become withdrawn, restless, and distracted. She told them she was thinking about starting over somewhere far away. On April 20th, she packed a few belongings and drove more than 200 miles to Montana. That night, she was seen at a gas station looking tired and distant. Around 8:15 p.m., her car drifted into the wrong lane on Highway 200 and collided head-on with another vehicle. The impact wasn't severe. No one was seriously hurt, but witnesses described what happened next as surreal. Patricia got out of her car, stared silently at the other driver, then turned away and walked into the darkness. She didn't speak, didn't look back, and disappeared into the open fields. When police arrived minutes later, her car was still running. Inside were her purse ID and an uncashed paycheck. Searchers followed her footprints into the grass, but they stopped suddenly near a barbed wire fence. Beyond that point, there was nothing. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Over the next few days, sightings poured in. A woman matching Patricia's description was seen at a truck stop in the next county, sitting alone and staring out a window. Another claimed to have given her a ride, saying she seemed confused and refused to give her name. But none of these leads ever led to her. Psychologists later suggested Patricia may have suffered a dissociative episode, a state where the mind detaches from reality under stress. If true, she may have been alive for some time after the crash, wandering in confusion and unable to remember who she was. Months passed, then years. Her parents searched tirelessly, following every lead from Montana to Washington State. They even placed her photo in People magazine, where readers across the country reported possible sightings, always of a quiet woman, alone, gazing at nothing in particular. But no trace of Patricia was ever confirmed. The Montana crash site has long since returned to quiet farmland. Wild grass has covered the spot where her car once sat, headlights burning into the night. And somewhere in that vast open landscape, Patricia Meehan's story remains frozen. A woman who quite literally walked out of her life and into legend. To this day, her fate is unknown. Some believe she died that night in the cold. Others think she started a new life, never remembering the one she left behind. On the evening of October 21, 1978, 20-year-old Frederick Valentich lifted off from Moorabbin Airport near Melbourne, Australia, in a single-engine Cessna 182. He was a young pilot with about 150 flying hours, careful, by the book, and fascinated by the unknown. His plan was simple: fly across Bass Strait to King Island, meet friends, and return before dark. He never made it. At 7:06 p.m., Valentich radioed Melbourne Air Traffic Control. His voice was calm but uncertain. He reported a strange aircraft flying above him, large, metallic, and moving unusually fast. "It's not an aircraft," he said moments later. "It's playing some sort of game with me." Controllers asked him to describe it. He said it had 4 bright lights and seemed to be orbiting his plane. Then came the words that would haunt investigators for decades: "It's not an aircraft." Seconds later, his transmission filled with a long metallic scraping noise. Then silence. No mayday, no crash signal, and no radar return. The line went dead. Search teams from the Royal Australian Air Force scoured the waters for 7 days. They found nothing: no wreckage, no oil slick, not even a fragment of the Cessna. Frederick Valentich and his plane had simply disappeared. Investigators examined every possibility. Some believed he had become disoriented, flying upside down and crashing into the sea. Others thought he may have staged his own disappearance. But there were problems with both theories. The Cessna had enough fuel for only a short flight, and Valentich, by all accounts, had no reason to vanish. He was close to his family, engaged to be married, and passionate about flying. Witnesses across southern Australia later reported seeing strange lights in the sky that same evening, glowing green and moving silently over the water. Others described a cigar-shaped object hovering near Cape Otway, the last place Valentich was heard. None of these reports were ever confirmed, but they fueled decades of speculation. In the years since, the case has become one of aviation's great mysteries. No trace of the aircraft or pilot has ever been recovered. Experts still debate what happened in those final minutes: disorientation, mechanical failure, or something truly unexplained. The final words of Frederick Valentich remain chilling: "It's not an aircraft." Then the strange metallic sound that lasted 17 seconds, and silence. To this day, the Bass Strait remains quiet, vast, and unforgiving. The last known resting place of a young pilot who may have seen something the rest of us never will. On August 2, 1947, a British South American Airways flight named Stardust prepared for landing in Santiago, Chile. The plane, a sleek Avro Lancastrian, carried 6 passengers and 5 crew on its final leg from Buenos Aires. The flight was routine, the weather clear, and the journey almost over. But just minutes before it was due to arrive, the crew sent one final Morse code transmission: a single word: "Stendek." Then silence. When the plane failed to arrive, Chilean authorities launched a massive search across the Andes. For days, rescue teams battled snow and altitude, scanning mountain passes for any sign of wreckage. Nothing. It was as if the aircraft had vanished into the clouds. The mysterious final word puzzled investigators. Stendek made no sense in any known code or aviation term. The operator who received it swore it had been transmitted clearly, twice. Was it a distress signal, a secret code, or simply a garbled word sent by a freezing crew? The families of those aboard waited for news that never came. The official explanation was grim but vague. The plane must have gone down in the Andes and been buried under snow. But for decades, nothing was ever found. No wreckage, no bodies, no trace of the Stardust or its passengers. Then, in 1998, more than 50 years later, two mountaineers climbing near Mount Tupungato discovered fragments of metal jutting out of the ice. Nearby, they found a wheel, bits of clothing, and the remains of human bones preserved by the cold. Investigators soon confirmed what no one had dared to believe. The wreck of the Stardust had finally been found. Experts concluded that strong winds and poor visibility had pushed the aircraft off course, slamming it into the glacier at nearly 200 miles per hour. The impact triggered an avalanche that instantly buried it beneath tons of snow, sealing it in ice for half a century. When the glacier began to melt in the late 1990s, the wreckage slowly emerged from its frozen tomb. But even with the mystery of its location solved, one question still remained. What did Stendek mean? Dozens of theories have been proposed. An acronym for severe turbulence encountered now descending emergency crash, a Morse code error for stand by, or something the radio operator misheard in the storm. No one knows for sure. Today, the remains of Flight Stardust still rest on the slopes of Mount Tupungato, twisted metal half buried in eternal snow. Its final word, Stendek, continues to echo across the decades, a message from the sky that no one has ever truly decoded. In July 1996, 4 tourists from Germany set out to explore the wild beauty of California's Death Valley. They were Cornelia Meyer, her boyfriend Egbert Rimkus, and Cornelia's 2 young sons, Georg and Max. They were experienced travelers on what was meant to be an ordinary summer road trip through the American Southwest. It would become one of the desert's most haunting mysteries. On July 23rd, the family rented a Plymouth Voyager in Los Angeles. They planned to visit Las Vegas, drive through Death Valley National Park, then return for their flight home. Postcards sent to relatives described the desert as endless and beautiful. Their last known stop came 2 days later, at a Death Valley visitor center. Egbert asked the ranger for directions to the best route through the park. He was warned not to drive off main roads. Temperatures were soaring above 50 degrees. But he smiled, thanked the ranger, and left anyway. Days later, when their rental car wasn't returned, the company reported it missing. Weeks passed with no sign of the family. Authorities first assumed they'd gotten lost or extended their trip. But when they failed to board their flight home, the search widened. The desert, however, offered nothing back. In October, a park ranger noticed faint tire tracks leading off a remote dirt road. Following them for miles, he discovered the family's van, locked, undamaged, and abandoned. Inside were folded maps, children's toys, and empty water bottles. The gas tank was bone dry. There were no footprints leading away, no signs of struggle, and no clue as to where they had gone. It looked as if the family had simply stepped into the heat and vanished. Search teams scoured the surrounding canyons by air and on foot. Helicopters flew low across shimmering plains, but the desert was endless. Wind erased every trace. Experts couldn't explain why they had driven so far off route into terrain unmarked on tourist maps. Theories ranged from curiosity to panic to a desperate shortcut gone wrong. None could be proven. For 13 years, their fate remained unknown. Then in 2009, 2 hikers stumbled upon scraps of clothing and sun-bleached bones near a remote canyon, almost 30 kilometers from where the van had been found. DNA confirmed the remains belonged to the missing German family. They had likely tried to walk for help and succumbed to the brutal heat, only miles from safety. Even with answers, one question lingered. Why had they ventured into one of the most unforgiving regions on Earth? No one will ever know what made them leave the road that day. Today, the rusting van still sits where it was found, half buried in sand and silence. The story of the Death Valley Germans remains a warning carved into the desert wind, a reminder that some places are beautiful, deadly, and will never truly give back their secrets. On March 20th, 2000, 28-year-old musician Grange Taylor left his home in San Francisco to drive to Los Angeles. He told friends he was heading south to meet someone about a possible music project, a chance to take his career further. He never arrived, and more than 2 decades later, no one knows what really happened along that long stretch of highway. Grange was talented, friendly, and ambitious. He played guitar in local bars and worked part-time jobs between gigs. Friends described him as grounded, not the kind of man to just disappear. That morning he packed light, a guitar, a duffel bag, and his old blue Honda Civic. He called his parents before leaving and promised to check in once he got to Los Angeles. He never made that call. 2 days later, his car was found abandoned near a desolate turnout off Highway 101, just outside of San Luis Obispo. The doors were unlocked and the keys were missing. Inside were his clothes, his wallet, and his guitar, still resting on the back seat. The car wasn't damaged and there were no signs of a struggle. It looked as though he had simply pulled over and walked away. Search teams combed the nearby hills, canyons, and rest stops. Helicopters flew overhead. Volunteers walked miles of rugged terrain. But there was no trace of Grange. No footprints, no belongings, no sign that he had ever left the area. He had vanished somewhere between 2 cities under an open sky. As investigators looked deeper, strange details emerged. His phone records showed no unusual activity. He hadn't withdrawn money, and there were no calls or texts after he left San Francisco. Family and friends said he wasn't depressed, and there was no reason for him to disappear willingly. He'd even booked a performance for the following week. Weeks turned into months. Rumors spread, hitchhikers, desert cults, even UFO theories, all born from the emptiness of the evidence. Some locals claimed to have seen a man matching Grange's description wandering near gas stations along the coast. But none of those sightings were ever confirmed. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed him. 20 years later, the case remains open but cold. His parents still keep his guitar, now silent, in their living room. Every year they drive the same highway he took, leaving flowers near the spot where his car was found. Somewhere along California's endless coast, a young musician disappeared between 2 dreams, the one he was chasing and the one that never came true. And like so many who vanish without a sound, Grange Taylor's story fades into the hum of the highway. On the evening of May 16, 1937, Parisians filled the cafes and boulevards, unaware that the city was about to witness one of its strangest murders. At 7 p.m., a young woman boarded an empty first-class metro carriage at Porte de Charenton. Less than a minute later, when the train stopped at the next station, she was dead. Her name was Letitia Thoreau, 29, graceful and independent. To most, she was an ordinary factory worker. In truth, she led a complicated double life. By day, she worked quietly. By night, she frequented dance halls and private clubs known for secretive patrons. She was confident, intelligent, and unafraid of the city's darker corners. Witnesses saw her step into the carriage alone. The train moved off, sealed between stations for barely 60 seconds. When it stopped at Porte d'Ore, waiting passengers found her slumped forward, a knife buried deep in her neck. Her gloves were still on, her purse in her lap, her hat perfectly straight. No one had seen anyone enter or leave. No one had heard a sound. The case baffled police. The doors had been locked while the train was moving. The killer had only moments to strike and vanish. Detectives believed the murderer boarded at the same stop, attacked in total silence, then slipped out through the crowd before anyone noticed. It was fast, efficient, and deliberate, a professional's work. When investigators looked deeper into Letitia's life, a web of intrigue appeared. She was connected to members of Paris's criminal underworld and to a private intelligence network tracking political extremists during the tense years before World War II. She had reportedly been passing information between rival groups, some tied to the far-right Cagoule movement, others to left-wing resistance circles. She may have known too much. Rumors spread across Paris that she had been silenced for espionage or killed by a jealous lover, or caught between warring factions. Newspapers called her the woman with 1,000 secrets. But despite months of investigation, no suspect was ever arrested and no motive was proven. By 1939, the case was quietly shelved, buried beneath the noise of a world preparing for war. Decades later, historians reopened the files, but many records had been lost. Only fragments remain: reports, witness notes, and a photograph of that empty carriage. The rest of the truth vanished with Letitia. Today, the mystery still lingers in Paris. A reminder of how easily secrets travel through a city built on shadows. One minute she was alive, riding the metro home. The next she was gone. A single minute between two stations and a mystery that has never reached its final stop. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. Every view, like, and comment helps these stories reach more people and keeps the memory of those still missing or unsolved alive. If you'd like to help the channel grow, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Tell me where in the world you're listening from and which story stayed with you most. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, the truth is often stranger than we think. This is Chapman Crime.